Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Nun Gimel contains two Mishnayos. These Mishnayos, like every other Mishnah in Perek Malkam Shenagu, discuss lists of halachos which have different customs in different places. The beginning of the Daf until the first Mishnah is finishing up a discussion about halacha of biur, when you have to remove fruits from your house if they're no longer available to the animals in the field in the year following Shemitah. The first Mishnah which we will get to will discuss the halachos of selling small farm animals and eating roasted meat on Pesach night. These are two halachos which have differing customs in different places. The Gemara will discuss those halachos at length with some agadata thrown in, and then we'll get to the second Mishnah, which will discuss the halachos of having lit candles in your home on Yom Kippur, and what the issue is there, and what the different manhagim are about that. So first of all, the Gemara is concluding its discussion about the halacha of biur. Biur, again, is the halacha that once fruits are no longer available to animals in the field, once these are Shemitah fruits that are no longer available to the animals in the field, you have to take those Shemitah fruits out of your house. You have to make them hefker. That's called biur. You can't keep eating them. However, once you're mafker them, you can take them back just like anybody else can. Now, the Gemara is going to do as follows. It's going to bring a brisa which gives a list of times that these fruits are finished, which contradicts another brisa that gives a list of places that are the last place where you can find specific fruits. So first we'll have the brisa with the list of places where you should check, and then we'll have the brisa that has a list of times. The Gemara is going to ask, there's a contradiction between the two. Which do we follow, the places or the times? And the Gemara will resolve the contradiction with two answers, and then the Gemara will bring an unrelated brisa about trees. So first of all, the Gemara gives a list of places to check for which fruits for when fruits are finished from the field. That means these will be the places that will have the last of each type of fruit, and if you don't find them here, you can find them anywhere else. The Brisa does say if you do find them somewhere else, coincidentally, then you can keep eating them because they are still available in the field. But these are the best places to check, at least within the general region. So the Brisa says as follows: grapes will last grow in a place called Oichel. Rashi has a gear so that it's Avel. Kramim, they have good grapes, that area, and therefore the last grapes will be found there. Olives will be found in Tekoa. Rabbi Eliezer says it's Gush Cholav. Now, when is it considered that the grapes are finished? When a poor person goes out to collect, and he will take everything he can find, but he doesn't find enough, not in the branches of the tree, and not near the trunk of the tree, to fill up a rova, a quarter kav measure, then it's considered to be finished. Now, what about figs? So dried figs are often kept in the house for a long time. You got to get rid of them when the small stunted figs of a place called Hini are finished. Says Rabbi Yehuda, no. Hini was talking about something else. Hini was a different halacha. Hini was that the figs, they are small, they don't grow very big. And Hini was mentioned that those figs are considered to be fruits. It's not considered to be some kind of garbage. They are fruits, and they are chayiv in meiser. It's also mentioned together with ahini, which means the dates of a place called Tuvina. Those are also small, and those are also chayiv in meiser. One more place here. The last place to find the dates are in a place called Tzoyar. Now, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel there says the dates which you find there only count if they are in the branches of the tree. The ones that fall off the tree and land in the thorns below the tree at the trunk, the base of the tree, those don't count because the animals can't get to them. So here's a list of places to check to find if there are still fruits available. The Gemara says this contradicts the Brisa, which gives specific times, not places to check. What's the Brisa? The Brisa says as follows: grapes you can eat until Pesach, olives until Shavuos, figs until Chanukah, and dates until Purim. Rabbi Yochanan quoted by Rabbi Bibi switches the last two: figs until Purim and dates until Chanukah. But either way, this gives you a list of times, not a list of places. How do you fit the two together? The Gemara says not a contradiction. Two resolutions. One is that it's the same. The times that these places finish are the times that are given in the list of times. It's absolutely the same. Second resolution, the Gemara says, is that these are the general guidance. If you find grapes longer than these times, fine. If you find grapes in a different place, for example, grapes or any other fruits in a different time, fine. It's general guidance. These are generally where you find the times and the places. If you, again, find in a longer place, that's fine. You can rely on the existence of those fruits in the field in order to be able to keep your fruits in your house. Okay, now the Gemara brings an unrelated brisa, which is related just in the sense that it's also discussing the halachas of trees. And this brisa defines four types of land formations. The Gemara will explain why we need each of these 4 land formations to be defined, but it defines them by trees. So it's a brisa brought which quotes of Shimon ben Gamliel, who says the sign to define mountains is that it has milin trees in it. It's a type of nut. Define valleys by the fact that it has the date trees in it. Now rivers, streams, are defined by certain reeds that grow in them, and plains are defined by shikma, sycamore trees that grow on them. As a hint to that, from a pasuk in Sefer Melachim, which says, "V'yitin hamelech hazakesa b'Yerushalayim." The king gave silver, money in Yerushalayim, ka'avanim, just like rocks, v'sarazim, and cedar trees, nasan kashakamim, asher abba shvela l'roiv. He gave so many cedars, like there are sycamores on the plain. So you see that sycamore is something which grows in the plain very plentifully. Now the Gemara says, why do I need each of these? Who cares defining these? So the Gemara says as follows: it's relevant to a number of halachos. First of all, in order for us to know which trees are chayav in bikurim. Bikurim is a mitzvah to bring the first fruits of each crop to the Beis Hamikdash. Bikurim only applies to the 7 fruits that Eretz Yisrael was praised with, the Shivas Haminim. The psukim describing Bikurim and the psukim describing the Shivas Haminim both use the word Be'artzecha that links the 2. It only applies to those as 7. We got to know what fruits are out. So these nut trees that grow in the mountains, those fruits are out. Those are not on the list. And it's also important for us to know that it's only high quality fruits which you have to bring. Low quality fruits you do not have to bring. Those nuts give some kind of honey. So you may think that they're included in the Shivas Haminim's word devash, where it says to bring honey. But honey fruits doesn't refer to that. It refers to the dates. They give honey, and they grow only in the valleys. So you got to define what's a valley, and you got to define what is the type of tree that you should bring bikurim from, and that is the date trees in the valley, not those other honey trees which grow on the mountain. Okay, now what do I have to know what rivers are for, which you're saying I should define them by reeds? That you have to know because a strong river, a river which does not run dry during the summer, that is used for egla rufa. When you find a dead person between 2 valleys, you bring a calf and kill it over a stream. It's got to be a solid stream. That has to be something that has reeds in it specifically. Now, you also have to know what valleys are. Again, valleys is a place where you should be bringing the date trees to bikurim from the valleys, because that's where you get the best dates. However, you should not bring grain from the valley for bikurim, because grain that goes in the valley is very low quality. It gets soggy and it rots based on the excessive moisture that are in the valleys. Now, why do I have to know what the plain is? Because the plain, you got to know. If somebody sells you a plain, you have to know what a plain is. You have to be able to define the flatlands of the plain. It says the Gemara, once you bring in something like that, if somebody's selling you something, then any of these words are relevant, because you have to know what all of them are referring to. And this takes us to the next Mishnah. We now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses 2 halachas which have varying minhagim in varying places. The first, which the Gemara has no comment on, is the halacha of selling small farm animals to a guy. Now the halacha is as follows: you should not sell a large farm animal to a guy, certainly not an ox. You should not sell a large ox to a guy for the following reason. If you were to lend or rent your animal to a guy, we're concerned that a problem may come up, and that would be that the guy will work that animal on Shabbos, and which means that a Jew's animal is working on Shabbos. That's forbidden. A Jew is obligated to make sure that his animal doesn't work on Shabbos. Now, therefore, we can't let you rent it or lend it to a guy. In order to prevent that from happening, we say don't even sell it to a guy, so that you should not end up accidentally forgetting and lending it or renting it to a guy. Now, that refers to large farm animals which could be worked. The question is, what about smaller farm animals? What about young farm animals? What about injured farm animals? And what about horses? So all these things are up for discussion. So the Gemara says as follows: the Tanakama held that young animals, which are too young to work, are forbidden to sell as well. There you may sell fully grown ones. The Tanakama also held that horses are forbidden to sell. There you may come to sell cows. Injured animals, it also held are forbidden to sell, because there you may come to sell healthy animals. Now, Rabbi Yehuda held you're allowed to sell injured animals. There is no, you will not get confused between injured and healthy animals. But Sarah said you're allowed to sell horses, because horses don't do farm labor. Horses carry people people riding on a horse is only Nesser Darabanan, and therefore we don't make all these Gzeras. The question that it boils down to is, what about other small animals? Can you sell a sheep to a guy? Sheep don't work. Or are we afraid if we let you sell a sheep, you can end up selling a cow, and if you sell a cow, you end up renting a cow, and if you rent a cow, the guy's going to end up working it, and you'll be violating the Isser of having your animal worked on Shabbos. So that had differing customs. Some places had the meaning not to sell a sheep, small farm animal, to a guy, and some places said that the custom is okay. Every place is allowed to keep their custom and is obligated to keep their custom. That concludes that discussion. The rest of the Mishnah just says there are some places that had the custom not to eat roast meat on Pesach night because it looked like you were eating the carbon Pesach. People get confused and think you're eating the carbon Pesach, and of course we cannot eat the carbon Pesach today, certainly not outside Yerushalayim. It's eating kodshim outside of its proper place, and therefore some places made that forbidden, and some places said no, it's not forbidden, we aren't concerned about that, you're allowed to eat it. Now the Gemara goes into the halacha of whether or not you're allowed to eat roast meat outside Yerushalayim. The Gemara is going to discuss what the Gzeira was, and the Gemara will have different approaches to whether the Gzeira is true. This will take us into a lengthier discussion, and we will get to a little bit of agadata about the person who's involved in this. So the Gemara says as follows: Rabbi Yehuda is the name of Rav. A person is not allowed to say this meat is for a Pesach, even though this meat is for Pesach, because even though all he means is that I'm going to eat it on Yontif, but what it sounds like he's saying, and what you will reinterpret his words as saying, is that this is a carbon Pesach. That would be wrong. It looks like he is being makdish his animal to be a carbon Pesach, and then he'll be eating, it will look like he's eating the kachim outside Yerushalayim. Says Rav Papa, that only applies to meat, but if he says this wheat is for Pesach, we don't worry that he's planning, that it looks like he's planning to sell the wheat and use the money to buy a carbon for Pesach. That much of a stretch we don't go. We understand that he just means to say that he plans on making matzah out of it, and that is okay. Now the Gemara has a kasha. We have just said, Yehuda Amar Rav says that we are concerned that we will view your roast meat, your meat for Yontiv, as being a carbon. The Gemara is going to show that we are not concerned about that at all. The Gemara brings the following thing. Titus, who was a big man in Rome, led the congregation there, and he had them eat something which looked just like a carbon Pesach on Pesach night. He had them roast lamb with its entrails hanging out of it, just like they did with the carbon Pesach itself. He had them roast it whole and eat it on Pesach night. It wasn't a real carbon. No carbon was actually brought, but it was very similar. So the Gemara had said that the Chachamim said to Taidos, they said if you wouldn't be such a big person, such a chasheva individual, we would have put you in chayrim for doing this. So Gemara says, now, what was the problem here? The problem was that he literally made it like a carbon, roasted whole with his entrails hanging out of it, just like carbon Pesach was done. That seems to imply that had it not been that way, if it would just be regular roast meat, it wouldn't be a problem. That contradicts Rabbi Yehuda's Halacha Ne'emarav that says when the guy says this is for Pesach, we reinterpret it. So Gemara says, no, it's not a problem. Over there, it's only problematic because he didn't say anything. The only reason that you need the entrails hanging out of it and that it should be roasted in a way that it looks like a carbon Pesach is because he didn't say anything. But in our situation, it's not being roasted in a way that looks like a carbon Pesach itself. Therefore, it's only problematic if he says this is for Pesach. If he does say this is for Pesach, then it becomes problematic even without the entrails hanging out. So we end up with two things. Roast meat is a problem if it's roasted like the carbon without saying anything, or if it's roasted in any way with saying this is for Pesach itself. Either of those two are problematic. There are no contradictory diukim you should make from one to the other. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know who said over this halacha. We have two versions. According to one Amar, it was Rabbi Yossi who said over this incident with Taidos, that it was a problem to roast it that way, or to say this carbon is for Pesach. That's implied from that halacha. And according to others, it's Reb Shimon. Rabbi Yossi or Reb Shimon. Which is it? So the Gemara first says it makes sense that it's Rabbi Yossi and not Rabbi Shimon. Why? So this is going to get into the halacha of what happens when somebody says something which doesn't make sense. He says a certain promise, a certain nedava, he plans to give something as a carbon, and it doesn't really work. It doesn't add up. Do we say that we're going to reinterpret his words to something meaningful, and that's what he's chayav to bring? Or do we say, listen, if what you said doesn't make sense, we take the entire statement and in its value, and if the entire statement doesn't make sense, it's meaningless. If it's meaningless, you don't have to bring anything. Included in this question is a sub-question. When somebody says one compound statement, and the first half means one thing, and the second half means something else, can we take the first half and ignore the second half, or do we have to take the entire thing as one? Now, these are two separate questions. They're very much related, but they're two separate questions. One is, again, do we evaluate your entire statement as one? And if it makes sense, then you said something. If it doesn't make sense, you don't say anything. The other question is, do we try to reinterpret your statement in a way which fits? What we're doing here in our Gemara about the carbon is we seem to be reinterpreting your statement as something that fits. The guy said, this is for Pesach. We're reinterpreting that to mean that this is a carbon Pesach, even though it's not exactly what he said. So do we do these reinterpretations or not? So the Gemara says, Reb Shimon holds you don't do these reinterpretations, and that would seem to be the reason that Reb Shimon cannot be the person who's quoting this halacha. The Gemara is going to try to say that Reb Yosi also says you don't do these reinterpretations, and therefore he shouldn't be the author either. And the Gemara is going to come off of that, and the Gemara will say no, Reb Yosi doesn't hold that way. Now, where do you see that Reb Shimon holds you don't do these reinterpretations? It's talking about somebody who says, I'm being menadev, I am going to donate a carbon mincha from barley. Now, there is no carbon mincha that can be donated from barley. It can only be brought from wheat. So do we say that the person said, do we take part of what he said, where he said, I'm going to give a donation of a carbon mincha? Stop him there. Don't look at the rest of what he said. Reinterpret that as him meaning to say, we're giving a carbon mincha. The fact that he said from barley is a later statement. We ignore that. And therefore he's chayiv in a carbon mincha from wheat. Or do we say, no, you have to take the whole statement and one, and we reinterpret it. Now again, we're doing two things here. We're taking just the first half of a statement, and we're interpreting something which makes no sense as something that makes sense. We're doing both of those. So, according to a Tanakama in a Mishnah, we do that, and we are mechayev in a carbon mincha of wheat. According to Rabbi Shimon, we don't, and he's not chayev anything. We take his whole statement as one, and we say he's not chayev anything. He was manadev a carbon mincha from barley. We do not take that, we do not reinterpret that, we don't take just the first half of that, we have to take the whole thing, and it doesn't make sense, and therefore he's not chayiv anything. So Gemara says, you see, Reb Shimon would not take parts of statements and reinterpret it to fit, and therefore he should not interpret the statement where somebody says this meat is for Pesach. We shouldn't interpret it as he's planning on using it for a carbon, or interpret it as that he's planning on selling it and buying a carbon with it. None of that. We shouldn't do any of that. It should not be viewed as a carbon at all, and therefore Rabbi Shimon shouldn't be the author or the quoter of this halacha that we said about Pesach meat. Now the Gemara says, well, it shouldn't be Rabbi Yosi either, because Rabbi Yosi says something similar. Rabbi Yosi says, in a case where somebody wants to do tumura, that means he has an animal which is a carbon, and he says, he brings another animal, and he says that the kedusha should switch off this carbon animal onto my other animal. Well, the halacha is when you do that, both animals become consecrated. You can't use either of them. It's also an iser daraisa, but both animals become consecrated. But this guy did something funny. He had a carbon oila, and he said he had two animals. He had a carbon oila and a carbon shlomim. And he brought another animal, and he said this one is in exchange for the oila and the shlomim. So now again, the same question. One animal can't be an oila and a shlomim. So do we say that he meant to do? We interpret what he meant as he meant to do the oila, and we just take the first half of what he said, and we ignore the second half of the shlamim, or do we say he meant to do both together, and therefore he wanted to have it be an oila and a shlamim, and therefore it's half and half, and it's kind of mixed thing, and it can't be brought as an oila or a shlamim, and it has to be left until it gets a moment. It can't be anything. So Rabbi Yosi there says, we do take the entire statement as one. We don't just cut off the first half of the statement, and therefore it has to be left to stay as an oila or a shlamim. Now, Rabbi Shimon said his halacha by the carbon mincha from barley is based on that halacha of Rabbi Yosi's. Again, remember, Rabbi Shimon had to do two things. He had to reinterpret it. He said you don't reinterpret the statement in a way that makes sense, and you don't just take the first half. So this bit of you don't just take the first half, that's like what Rabbi Yosi said in the case of the Tamura. Rabbi Yosi said you don't just take the first half of what he said. He said this is a Tamura of a oila and a shlamim. Rabbi Yosi said you don't just take the first half, you take the whole thing and it's an oila and a shlamim together. So Rabbi Shimon says, based on that halacha, I am saying you don't just take the first half of the guy who said I'm bringing a carbon mincha from barley. You don't just take the first half and say he's bringing a carbon mincha. You got to take the whole thing together. So Rabbi Shimon is therefore going with this halacha of Rabbi Yosi. Now, the Gemara wants to say, therefore Rabbi Yossi obviously holds of Rabbi Shimon's halacha all the way. And he also says, you don't take just the first half, and if you say something which doesn't make sense, then we throw the whole thing out. We don't reinterpret it to fit. Says the Gemara, no, not so fast. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi both agree to this halacha that you got to take the whole statement. That's why Rabbi Yossi said that if the guy says it's an oila and a shlomim, it's an oila and a shlomim. You don't just say it's an oila and ignore the and a shlomim half. You got to take the whole statement. However, Rabbi Yossi does not go further, and he does not say that we refuse to reinterpret the statement in a way that makes sense. It could be that we will reinterpret the statement in a way that makes sense. And therefore, in the case of the Korban Pesach, he would say that we will reinterpret the guy's statement and say that he means to bring it as a Korban Pesach, or he means to sell it and buy something else with this animal. We will reinterpret it. Again, even though we'll take the whole statement, that I do agree to, but here we could reinterpret it, and therefore we'll reinterpret it, and we will say that it's a problem because he's trying to bring a carbon which he shouldn't be allowed to do. Okay, now the Gemara wants to go further. The Gemara goes back to the story with Taidais, who led the congregation to roast meat for Pesach night. The Gemara says that the Chachamim had said, if you were anyone else, we would have censured you and put you in the Cherem. The Gemara says, what do we mean when he say he's a big guy? We mean that he's a chashiv person, he's a Talmid Chacham, or do we mean that he's a strong man, and therefore the Chachamim had a certain amount of fear from him? So the Gemara says, we'll show you that he's a chashiv individual because of an interesting drasha that he makes. Taidai said, how did Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, who allowed themselves to be thrown into a furnace rather than bow down to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, how did they know that that's what they were supposed to do? So Gemara said, even though it wasn't technically a Avodah Zarah, it's a Mechilek Zushanim if it was a Avodah Zarah or not, but either way, it was not serious Avodah Zarah. It was not real Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara says, that Taidai said that they made a kavachemer from the frogs in Mitzrayim who allowed themselves to be thrown into the oven while it was hot. And they said, if those frogs who have no mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem went into the oven while it was hot, we should certainly allow ourselves to be thrown into the Kivsh and Eish in order to avoid making a Chal Hashem, because we are commanded in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Okay, that's a very big thing that he said. Says the Gemara further, one thing that Taidai used to do was he would give merchandise to Talmidei Chachamim, that they should be able to have some kind of business and some kind of income to be able to support themselves. Says the Gemara, somebody who does that is Zoicha v'Yoshev b'Yeshiva Shamayla. He has the merit of sitting in the heavenly yeshiva, like it says, Ki b'tzel ha'chachma, b'tzel ha'kesef. This takes us to our next Mishnah, which discusses the halacha of having light in your home on Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara that in some places that have the custom to have light in the house on Yom Kippur, they light candles to be on Yom Kippur, and in some places they keep the houses dark on Yom Kippur. They're both concerned about the same thing, and that is that it is forbidden for a man to be together with his wife on Yom Kippur. So the places that keep the candle on are trying to encourage that prohibition, because it's forbidden anyway for a person to be mishamish mitasei, to be together with his wife when there's a candle burning. So by having a candle on, they'll have another reason to avoid that. Others say, no, you want it to be dark so that you won't see his wife, and then that will create desires like this. There won't be any desires created. Now the Gemara discusses the halacha of the bracha on fire. Says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, you make a bracha on fire to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the bria of fire once a week on Motzei Shabbos, like we do in Havdalah. We say Bari Mari Ha'esh. Says the Gemara, a certain old man, which usually refers to Eliyahu Hanavi, or possibly Rabbi Bar Bachana, said this is correct, and so said Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara is going to discuss whether Rabbi Bar Bachana really said this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara relates an incident. The Gemara says, Ula, Rabbi Abba, and Rabbi Bar Bachana were riding together on some donkeys. And Rabbi Abba turns to Ula and he says, is it correct that you two said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that you only say a bracha on fire on Motzei Shabbos? The reason that's surprising is because we do say a bracha on Motzei Yom Kippurim, because fire is forbidden to have on Yom Kippur. So we do say a bracha after Yom Kippur to show that now fire is permitted, as opposed to every other Yom Tov in which fire is permitted to have in the house, and even permitted to be transferred from one flame to another. On the Yom Tov itself, Yom Kippur is a different Yom Tov. So it's not only Motzei Shabbos you say a bracha on fire, it's also Motzei Yom Kippur. So Gemara shows that Rabbi Abba asked, Ula, is it true that you and Rabbi Bar Bachana say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that you don't say the bracha on Yom Kippur, Motzei Yom Kippur, you only say it Motzei Shabbos? Gemara says, Ula looked at Rabbi Bar Bachana, didn't say anything, he just looked at him with an angry face as if to say, did you say that? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Bar Bachana understood the look, and he said, I never said that. I did quote Rabbi Yochanan saying a halacha about fire on Motzei Yom Kippur and about Motzei Shabbos, but I didn't say that. What I did say is as follows. A Mishnah is quoted in the name of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, who says that when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos itself, those who have the custom not to have a fire in their house on Yom Kippur, not to have light in the house on Yom Kippur, they do have light in their house if it's on Shabbos. And the reason is because of Kavod Shabbos, they want to have light in the house. And on that, I said, Rabbi Yochanan said that Chachamim argue on that halacha of Shimon ben Elazar, and they say, no, in those places, even though it's Shabbos, you still don't have light. That's the only thing that I said similar to that subject in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Gemara, Rav Yosef was very impressed with this discussion between Ula and Rabbi Bar Chana, and he said, you could apply to this the pasuk of Mayim Amukim Eitza B'leiv Ish V'ish Tivuna Yidlena. Deep waters are wisdom in the hearts of man, and a man of wisdom can draw them out. The man of the deep waters of wisdom in the heart of man is Ula, who is able to communicate his displeasure just with a look. And the man of wisdom will draw them out is Rabbi Bar Chana, who understood the look and was able to correct the mistake just by understanding the look and clarifying the look.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.